Welcome to Westminster Watch. I'm Nick de Bois. On this week's show, if someone is accused of wrongdoing, at what point should they be stopped from coming to work? Well, if that person is a member of Parliament, the government suggested it should be if they're charged with an offence. But the House of Commons has just voted for earlier than that, when they're arrested on suspicion of a serious sexual or violent offence. But does that go too far? Is it a case of guilty until proven innocent if you're an MP? And is the need for this new rule at all a sign of a bigger cultural problem in the Westminster workplace? It happens more often than it should. MPs coming down on the wrong side of the law. But at what point do you physically stop them coming to Parliament, taking away their constituents' voice in Westminster? Under new plans, MPs who are arrested for a serious sexual or violent offence can be referred to a committee who will then decide whether they should be banned from attending. It's all about the safety of workers in Westminster and leading by example. Common sense, you might say, but the vote was on a knife edge, passing by a majority of just one. Let's take a look at some of the arguments on both sides.
Just on this one day, I've spoken to 2 women who were raped by members of this Parliament. 2, just today. That's a fairly standard day for me. And I noticed that these are not the people who've so far been mentioned much today. And some of them told me what they wanted me to say today. The exclusion at the point of charge sends a clear message to victims that not only will we not investigate unless a victim goes to the police, but we won't act unless they're charged, which happens in less than 1% of cases. Exactly. So what's the point?
Now, in this instance, we are suggesting that a small committee will have the power to deny constituents representation. That is not within the power of this House, unless it acts as a whole. A small committee cannot deprive members of the right of attendance. It is a right, as I say, that goes back to 1340, and the only way to override such ancient rights, this is the whole basis of our system of common law, is by legislation, not by motion.
And joining me now is Member of Parliament for Alex Salmond's Alba party in Scotland, Neil Hanvey, who voted in favour of expelling members of Parliament after arrest, even if they haven't been charged. Neil, welcome to Westminster Watch. I'll start with the obvious question, if I may. Why do you think it is a good idea and necessary to put MPs forward for being banned at the point they are arrested only on suspicion of an offence?
Well, it's exclusion as opposed to banning, and it's really, I think, fundamentally, as you would find in any workplace, it's the protection of those who have made the accusation, if they are parliamentary staff. It's for the protection of the member as well. Let's not forget that they are at risk of further accusations or recrimination should they return to Parliament. So it provides, I think, a safe balance to make sure that all parties are protected as far as possible, and that there's no risk of any further transgressions should they find themselves on the estate, or indeed accusations of further transgressions. You know, you've got to remember the House of Parliament is not just the chamber. It's an enormous estate where many, many thousands of people work, and we have to make sure that everyone's protected. There can be no special cases. As you would find in any workplace, people are either suspended or excluded at a point where investigation begins, and not when the charges against them have been substantiated and leading to an arrest.
The fact of the matter is, though, we are turning on its head, are we not, the idea of innocent until proven guilty here. And that, for an MP in particular, who is very much in the public eye and could, of course, be found absolutely innocent of any allegations. That's quite a lot to stomach for, that puts them, if you like, at a higher level of scrutiny, a different set of rules from most people in the public, doesn't it?
Well, I think when you operate in the public eye, you're always at much greater risk of attention being drawn to events such as this. But the reality is, if you are in any workplace and you're arrested, the whole likelihood is that you will be suspended from your employment at the point of arrest, not at the point of being charged. And as I've said, this is not about making a judgment. That's a separate issue. That's what the courts
Neil,
of
sorry
justice
to interrupt you there, Neil. The public, the people who vote for him, some people who would say the MP employer is the voters, they will be making lots of judgments based on the fact their MP cannot be in Parliament and is deemed almost, in the eyes of many, seen as guilty. It seems extremely odd to churn on lawmakers the idea that you are guilty until proven innocent.
Well, I mean, that's a risk that anyone who's accused of any serious crime, which is, the only cases that we're talking about here are sexual and violent crimes. Anyone who's accused of a sexual or violent crime will unfortunately be tarnished in some way in the eyes of those around them, and quite often in the eyes of the public if it's reported widely in the media. I think in Scotland we have a very clear position on contempt of court proceedings, and when someone is arrested, that's when contempt of court rules kick in. So there is much less sensationalism in the media, or there's supposed to be much less sensationalism in the media until the actual court case begins. And I think I would suggest that that's a responsibility for journalists to make sure that they're not misreporting or exaggerating allegations, because people have the right to make accusations against someone who they believe has transgressed the normal rules or code of behaviour that we expect from each other around violent or sexual crimes. But also the person who's been accused has also the right to some privacy and distance from their accuser whilst the matter makes its way through the courts. I mean, it's just an unfortunate...
It's a heavy price to pay, though, but let's just remember it's not one person who is effectively been affected by this. It's also the 80,000 or so constituents who will no longer have a representative in Parliament. Take the Andrew Rossendale case, the MP for Romford. 2 years he was investigated, no charges, and they lost their MP effectively for 2 years. Isn't that the risk with what you've just voted for? You're denying representation?
Well, I mean, there's always a balance to be struck. You can hold up exemplars of where people have been falsely accused, wrongly accused, where perjury has been committed. And it's the court's decision to establish that fact. That's not something that any of us really are in a position to take a view on
but
before.
That is what you're doing in Parliament. So forgive me, but that's what the panel in Parliament that will be formed is making a decision on whether this person is a risk in the parliamentary estate, and with that, denying 80,000 constituents their MP.
Well, I'm sorry, I disagree. That is just a normal process in any workplace, that someone who's been arrested for violent or sexual assault will in all likelihood find that they are suspended from work until the investigation has concluded. And I think that it's very important that the people who have made such accusations are protected from, as I say, any further transgressions of that individual, or indeed the presence of that individual.
If I may, I agree with you. Can I interrupt you on that specific point? Because I think you make a really important point. The victim, if you like, the potential victim, the one who the complainant, does need protecting. Isn't there a way of providing risk management without kicking the MP out of Parliament?
Well, I'm not entirely sure that there is. I would say that this should apply, you know, in a balanced way. So, you know, for example, if the MP is the victim, then they should be protected. I think in any risk assessment, you've got to manage and mitigate any further risk of harm. And I think that, you know, it's very difficult to have a different set of rules for different situations. I mean, we're hopefully talking about very, very rare occurrences.
Indeed.
And one of, I think, the hopeful expectations of this type of rule is that anyone who's tempted to commit an offence like this will think very carefully before they do commit an offence. But of course, you know, miscarriages of justice happen, and it's, you know, there is no way to unfortunately mitigate or predict someone who's prepared to perjure themselves.
But Neil, that goes to the heart of the problem. This is dealing with an offender. That's blatantly obvious, and we've discussed that. But actually, none of this is dealing with the core problem. You work in a place where it seems it's pretty much okay for MPs in positions of power to actually harass and sometimes more serious sexual offences than that. What is the problem with Parliament that this is happening in Parliament?
Well, I mean, I would make one observation of my time in politics, not just in Westminster, but in politics more generally. In my assessment, there are two principal types of people in politics. There are people who want to do important things, and there are people who want to feel important. And I would suggest that it's that latter group who are seduced by the trappings of power and are more likely to commit offences that are effectively located in the exercise and abuse of that power.
I'm afraid we'll have to bring this to an end. Neil Hanvey, Member of Parliament for the Alba Party, thank you very much indeed for joining me here on Westminster Watch. This isn't just about the MPs. There is a huge workforce in Parliament every day. And does the fact that there are such concerns about safety in Westminster speak to a wider cultural and behavioural issue with the workplace? Well, who better to ask than two former special advisors who've been there, Charlie Rowley, who was with the Conservatives, and Scarlett Maguire, who was an advisor for Labour. Both join me now in the studio, and welcome to you both. So I will ask you both, beginning with you, if I may, Scarlett. Have you ever witnessed bad behaviour at work or been made to feel uncomfortable?
No, I haven't, but I certainly know that there was behaviour before me. I mean, remember, it's very different being an older woman in Parliament. It was much easier for me, and I could walk out at any time. Whereas I think that for a lot of the young men and women in there, it is incredibly difficult, particularly when they have full-time jobs.
And is that because it's a job that they've craved for so long that you feel that this must come as a bit of a shock to them, but there's an element of fear there that they just don't want to lose their job?
Oh yeah, I mean, a friend of mine ended up being a secretary, an executive assistant, because she was so desperate to go. Because that's the point: is what happens when you leave? And the problem with MPs is they have massive egos. They're treated like little kings around the place, and it's all a power play.
Charlie, have you ever witnessed or been on the receiving end yourself of being made to feel uncomfortable or seen bad behaviour?
I haven't, but you know, the number of stories that you hear about people that have faced difficulty with their bosses or with other people on the parliamentary estate or wider suggests that there is a problem. But I have seen, obviously, the culture, and it is a different culture whereby, you know, you've got MPs and staffers working sometimes very late at night. There are a few outlets on the parliamentary estate where people can go and can have a drink, and you know, that one drink might lead to one too many.
But isn't that true of many workplaces? You could do that. Why does it seem so disproportionately high, the number of cases that we hear about in Parliament, do you think?
I think for two things. I think the first is because it's a massive networking arena. So, if you're in politics, you want to be talking to journalists, you want to be talking to other organisations, you want to be talking and interacting with lots of different people. And when you're away from home, particularly for an MP, if you've got a family back in the constituency, you might be far away from London. When you come to London for those 4 or 5 days a week, you end up sort of working very late at night. Yes, you are treated very well because you are in control of your constituency, but at the same time, you're getting a torrent of abuse, maybe online or from your post bag, which can lead to all kinds of emotions, which then leads to perhaps maybe drinking or too many late nights or too much work and bad decisions. Now, those bad decisions are very different to a lifestyle choice versus crossing that line into inappropriate behaviour, maybe between a member of staff or someone else.
I mean, Scarlett, Charlie is right that there is a huge demands and pressures placed on MPs that few who do not work in that environment would perhaps understand. Are we actually, with the introduction of this regulation that means that they could be suspended from their job simply for being questioned or arrested on suspicion of something and not charged, are we holding them to a higher standard than people in other professions?
Actually, in a lot of professions, for sexual misconduct, you're suspended, and then they try and find out whether you're guilty or not. So we're not. But I mean, it is so bad that a friend of mine who was a junior minister, her Secretary of State, if she went in after 6 p.m, she would try. Sometimes she would sneak below his door so he couldn't know she was in. Because if
and what could she have done about that? Well, at the time, there's a lot of criticism that there was nowhere to go for someone to complain. But we're in a different age now, where it's being called out, isn't it?
Well, yeah. So at that time, there was nothing she could do short of resigning, and she just lived with it. But now
But can I ask you, what was she living with? Was these sexual advances? Were they
sexual advances? It was sexual advances. It was chasing her around a table. It was that whole thing all the time. She was an MP herself. What's much, much worse is what happens in the offices of MPs when you close the door.
So this was an MP you were talking about?
Yeah.
Who was
No. I mean, I can tell you, the more senior you get in any party, and this is a cross-party thing. I mean, Charlie would agree with me. The Tories, Labour, I mean, frankly, Lib Dem, anybody who becomes an MP suddenly thinks they're important.
So how do we deal with that? Because, let's face it, MPs are important, aren't they, Charlie? They are currently, however, effectively employed by no one except their electorate, who only get the chance to hire or fire them every time there's an election. They answer to no one, even around the parliamentary estate, with very limited options for staff that they employ to go somewhere to complain. Is there a danger that to fix this problem, you may get ideas coming up and make MPs employees and have them working to a different standard? That would be a danger, wouldn't it? Because we need our MPs to be entirely independent and only accountable to the electorate.
I think you're absolutely right. There's a problem because every MP runs their office in a different way. They're all individuals. They all come from different backgrounds. And so it's very difficult to then ask an MP from one particular background or that's got a particular job or a particular interest in certain areas to then report into someone who...
An administrator.
Exactly, who's never elected them, never voted for them, and it makes it difficult. I mean, the one thing that I would slightly disagree with Scarlett on is that I think we have to recognise that, yes, MPs are important, but they do live very, very different lives and are in very, very different situations and circumstances than the majority of other people in any other jobs. And I think we've just got to be open about that. So I think, not that there has to be any leniency, I'm not suggesting that at all, but you have to accept that if you're in the public eye and you're called up to do media interviews, you've got to vote on national legislation, the pressures are great. I'm not saying they're necessarily greater than anywhere else, but there are different pressures than perhaps what you get in any other job. So if you are going to be accused of something, it's very easy to target someone in the public eye than it might be somewhere else. So I think, until somebody is necessarily charged with something, or in fact actually proven guilty of something, then it's very hard to suspend an MP who's actually a legislator
He's got a point,
for the national issue.
He's got a point, except think of the person who's made the complaint. is so they have to go on working with that person, which is why there are so few complaints. I mean, most of the complaints are below the radar. You've heard of them, I've heard of them. It's amazing how very few. I mean, you can partly see if you look at an MP, if you look at the way the staff go round, the MPs who keep their staff, and we're not just talking, I mean, at the moment we're talking about sex, right? But I mean, there is also just casual bullying, right? But that's what so they have to try and these people are in love with politics.
Okay, but hang on. There's a point here that you're making that I'm slightly concerned, to pick up on what Charlie said, with the rules that have been voted through now. We are saying you are guilty, right? Even though you've been arrested, even though you haven't been trialed, and you are kicked out, and you can't represent your constituents properly. You're no longer going to be allowed on this palace. What happened to innocent until proven guilty?
But the reason is, look at it the other way. The reason is because of the person who complained. And they have to be quite serious. And we're not saying as soon as a complaint goes in, it's over. What we're saying is once they've been arrested. So once the police are worried about it, then something happens. Now, they can go on looking after their constituents. They can stay in the constituency. They can have a proxy vote.
They can't be in the House of Commons.
They can have a proxy vote. So actually, they can do an awful lot.
They can't lobby ministers. They can't bring about change. And they are innocent at this point.
We have no idea, right? But there is a complaint. So what do you do? Or else, I mean, frankly, the person who complained has the problem. I mean, and that's what we know, is that when you get it in most offices, right, the person who is complained against will be suspended.
Well, the answer, I think, until I don't think you can make a decision on someone who is being accused until there is something concrete like being charged. But I think what we need to have, again, recognising that MPs are in a very, very different role to anyone else in public. So any complaint needs to be dealt with in super quick time, so that the issue can be dealt with immediately. But I know it is very difficult, because if you are a victim, a genuine victim, and you're making an accusation against someone in a higher authority, that's very difficult when you are the underdog in that sense. But I just flip it again back to the original question. If you look at Harvey Proctor, a fantasist who accused him of all kinds of things, where he was arrested and his life was absolutely pulled apart because of the police investigation. That man was totally innocent on the back of a fantasist, and because the police believed him, he was arrested. Under these rules, it could happen to any MP today, and they would have their reputation.
I mean, there's plenty of examples where it's gone horribly wrong.
No, it has gone horribly, but actually not from complaints within the offices. So the problem with, I mean, what happened to Harvey Proctor was dreadful. And then we have, I'm trying to think, what was his name? John Dave. I mean, that terrible man who accused all sorts of people.
Known as Nick.
Nick. And actually, what we hope is that the police have learnt about checking facts.
But how fair is it that if you've now, many Labour MPs from your side of the House voted, as we know, to have you suspended, potentially suspended, if you are just arrested, look how long it takes for an investigation to take place. We are talking years. Andrew Rossendale, 2-year inquiry, not allowed near Parliament, not allowed to represent his constituents, and his name dragged through the mud. That isn't fair, is it? Can't we manage someone in Parliament who may be arrested?
So how do you manage somebody in Parliament when somebody in their office has made the complaint? That's the problem, right?
Find them another job and give them the opportunity to move, maybe?
Oh, right. So you move. It's always the victim that gets moved. But also, a lot of special advisor women, when the last one came up, they had a meeting saying, we are not happy if an MP accused of sexual misconduct is allowed to go on working, and we have to deal with them. So actually, the problem is that for all the people on the other side, they're very, very worried. And
yeah, of course.
And can I say, I mean, I talk about women, but actually, I mean, an MP I was talking to said the worst was the young gay men who for whom it's slightly secretive and they find it very, very difficult. And one has to say that once the complaint is made, there are a lot of people who try and persuade you to take that complaint
I
out.
totally accept that point, but I'm going to move you on to a final quick question, if I may. Look, you both work there. This is now very much in the public news, what it's like. Would you go back to work there, Scarlett?
Oh yeah, I mean the thing is, I understand MPs. I mean, I might think that they're power hungry. I have never worked for one
So
with
you
a
would
sexual
go back?
problem.
Would
I'd
you go back,
easily.
Charlie?
I would, and I think just again, sort of flipping what Scarlett said earlier on, I thought the more senior you become, and look, I ended up working for Theresa May and Michael Gove. I don't think I would be someone that an MP would want to try it on with or try anything, because they know how senior you are. They know actually you could probably deal with it, report them, and you're on a level pegging. So it's the junior staff, the new entrants that I think are more vulnerable. But I would go back, of course.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and thanks again to all my guests for joining me. And don't forget to subscribe to the TRT World YouTube channel for more lively debate and conversation. But for now, from me and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.